good evening, and thank you everyone for coming along to this additional children's overview and scrutiny meeting today, where we will be looking at the safety valve programme, which we have been invited to join or potentially join with the Department for Education. Just to before we start, just some housekeeping as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of your nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the surface car park at the front of the annex. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And do you have any apologies for this meeting, please?
We have apologies from the members of Youth Parliament, Chair.
Thank you. We have no substitute members. So item number 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? So, Councillor Moriarty.
I both regularly teach young people with EHCPs, and I had a child who had an EHCP in the past.
I have a family member who has EHCP. BCP Council.
Thank you. And just to confirm, I also have a family member who's in receipt of an EHCP with BCP Council. So item number 4, public issues. Do we have anyone today with any public questions and statements, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have Adam Sofianos with 2 questions. If you'd like to come and read them out. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I have a couple of questions and a statement. Question 1. I applaud the efforts of the Chair and officers to bring this matter to committee. Safety Valve is a controversial programme and deserves thorough scrutiny. Now, the government invitation, dated 18th July, sets out a process timetable. The critical period is in early January, when the draft management plan is reviewed and updated. At this point, officers will also have the final deficit reduction and payment schedules. These are the key features in any safety valve contract. But we don't have the management plan or contract schedules today. But these are critical. So, will the Council provide these to committee members for scrutiny as soon as each is available? And will Council facilitate a further committee meeting before the final meeting with the government's team to ensure that scrutiny plays a proper role in the political clearance process referred to in that letter, and thus ensure that these documents are made available to the public?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sofianos, for your question and your interest as always. The management plan we have currently for the Delivering Better Value programme has been included in the pack for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We have not yet developed a management plan or contracts for the Safety Valve programme. These will be completed and reviewed with the DFE support officers prior to submission and can be provided to the committee prior to the final Safety Valve meeting with the DFE. Once the contract is agreed, this is published on the DFE website. Whether the Council facilitates a further committee meeting before the final meeting with the government team is dependent on the Chair and the members of this committee with advice from Democratic Services with a mind to officer capacity.
Thank you. Question 2 is where it gets complicated. The statutory override, which ring fences dedicated schools grant overspending, expires in April 2026. At that point, without further intervention, any council which cannot balance these cumulative DSG deficits faces a Section 114 notice. Each of the 34 existing safety valve contracts sets out a schedule for annual reductions in that council's own underlying deficit. But there is not a single contract that projects an elimination of such deficits by 2026. What of net deficit figures, i.e. including those government payments? Well, the two largest contracts for Kent and Norfolk cover deficits well over 100 million, a situation likely to be faced here. Yet these contracts forecast net deficits of 74 million and 62 million in 2026. This amplifies growing concerns that Safety Valve itself cannot resolve this deficit burden. So for BCP Council, what are the cumulative underlying and net deficits projected for April 2026 under Safety Valve?
Thank you very much for your question. I believe Councillor Burton, you're answering this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, Mr. Safianos, for your question. We do not have a cumulative underlying and net deficit for April 2026 as projected under the safety valve, as this has not been projected yet. The negotiations are still at an early stage. Under the Delivering Better Value programme, assuming savings can be delivered with a high confidence level from the activities identified, is 157.8 million accumulated deficit. Savings are from reduced education, health and care plan growth, greater proportion of placements in mainstream schools, new places being created in special schools, and with better utilisation to reduce the use of higher cost independent schools. One example of this is our Cabinet Paper 25th October 2023, minute number 49, SEM Programme of Expansion, Broadstone School, that I'm bringing to the full council tomorrow evening.
Thank you. And I believe, Mr. Safianos, you have a statement
Yes.
you'd like to read.
Thank you to Councillor Burton, first of all. So Safety Valve is controversial. Two targets are particularly contentious: reductions in the EHCP's issues and increased placements of affected children into mainstream settings. Its management plan template requires councils to agree targets for everything from care plans to transport costs, based not on need, but on quotas. Other struggling authorities are moving up to 80% of affected children into mainstream schools, or pulling funding from other school services, or raiding school reserves to meet safety valve targets. EHCPs are a safeguard, a safety net, an assurance that a child will have a fair chance to access education. And regardless of any safety valve incentives, they remain a statutory duty. Families are afraid that the future will deliver even worse outcomes. I ask the Council to ensure that whatever happens, that will not be the experience for our most vulnerable children.
Thank you very much, Mr. Safianos, for your contribution. It was most valued. So agenda item number 5, just before we go on to that, we've a few guests this evening who are helping us with us looking at this item, and we have our Director of Children's Services, Miss Kathy Hadley, the Chief Executive for BCP Council, Graham Farrant, who's joining online. We also have Parent Governor co-opted representatives joining online, Mr. P. Martin and Mr. S. Welsh. And we also have a Mr. Matthew Kerr joining online as well, who is quite new to us. I don't think we've met him before. And I just wondered if he wouldn't mind just saying a few words, introducing himself and providing a flavour of his experience in this world. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm a parent of 2 disabled children. I provide advice to parents and schools on SEND issues. I've given evidence to the Education Select Committee SEND inquiry on funding and accountability issues.
Thank you very much. And I believe you've written a few reports on safety valves delivering better value, which are being published in national reads and journals, etc. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. So on to agenda item number 5. And Kathy, are you introducing this one? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of this report, some of the things that have already been said have rehearsed the background, but I will just go through it for completeness. Obviously, BCP Council in 2021 received a written statement of action against the inspection against SEND, and there were 8 areas of development. Since 2014, nationally, there has been an the system is very overwhelmed. The EHCP has increased by 215% between 2015 and 2022 nationally. This has put a massive financial strain across the system nationally. And as everybody's rehearsed already talked about, is the statutory override lasts until 2026. And at that point, there are many councils that are carrying very high deficits, which will push them into risk of a 114 that's already been outlined. In terms of BCP at this current moment in time, on the 31st of March, the deficit will be running at 62.9 million. And by 2026, it will be somewhere in the region of 157 million if we do nothing. In terms of the Delivering Better Value programme, that is something that we have been part of. We did a lot of work and with a company called Newton Europe, which was assigned to us by the DFE. They enabled us to have a look at our work and our programmes and came up with a work package which we then were enabled to apply for a grant that we received of £1 million. That funding is there to help us in terms of managing the work and the deficits. I would say that work has then culminated in a very small impact on the deficit as we go forward. And so therefore it is considered that we should, as we have been, invited on the safety valve. The safety valve, as we've already rehearsed, will culminate in an agreement with the DFE in January 2024. They are looking for an in-year balance within 5 years, and that will be an agreement, and the actions of achieving that will be agreed with the DFE as we go forward. The agreement with the DFE will then be put forward for ministerial agreement in the system. So the invite to the safety programme has been accepted under the duties of the chief exec, and there is work underway with the DFE to consider what the programme would look like and what the action plan would look like.
Thank you very much. Graham Farron, did you have anything you wanted to add to that or open up to the floor at this moment?
No, nothing much to add. Thank you for that, but it is a very complex position, and it clearly is a major concern to the council in terms of the financing of the service. So I think you've picked up the main issues. Safety valve is a potential solution to some of the financing, but the constraints and the requirements of it are pretty severe. So we're entering into a negotiation and conversation. I genuinely don't know whether we will reach a position that we would be prepared to accept, or one that we might propose that the DFE would be prepared to accept. But we're having the conversation because if we don't, as Kathy Hadley has just pointed out, the deficit grows. If the set-aside rules get changed or get reversed from 2026, the council cannot, well, it's not sustainable financially. I think Mr. Stofianos talked about, talked about Section 114. it's not about Section 114, it's about whether the council can balance its budget. And that becomes increasingly difficult as the cost of the service increases. So it is a very serious matter for the council. I'm glad that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are looking at it, because it is a big issue, possibly the biggest issue we face financially.
Thank you, and of course, not forgetting our families and CYPs out there, because it'll be one of the biggest impacts on them since we've had the SEND reforms in 2014 as well. Thank you. I'm just open up to the floor to see if anyone has any questions at this point. Yes, certainly, Councillor Peter Cooper.
It seems really a really complex situation we find ourselves in, and I'm not too sure whether I've got a complete skill set to deal with some of the really complicated decisions that we're going to have to make. So I think what we need to do by fleet of foot is identify who within in the council and what councillors can get their head around not only the logistics and the speed of this, but the financial implications in all the different departments that are going to be hit hard, and begin to collectively meet on a regular basis about this, because I cannot get my head around it at the moment. For me, it just seems like the central government is not funding local authorities, and I'm sorry about this, it's just the way it is. They're not funding local authorities. There's a long-term plan, which I'm not too sure what it is, but it's destroying local authorities, stopping us from being able to deliver the services to our residents who have voted us all in. And I want to look them in the eye and just say, yeah, I'm going to vote, and I'm going to sit at the table, and I'm going to vote for something which I think is going to make the lives of children, young people and families better in BCP. And at the moment, I don't feel that. So I need a collective sense of responsibility to make us feel that and work together on it, not feel I'm just going to be voting on something that I don't understand. So there you go.
Thank you, and hopefully tonight will help provide a bit more
Hopefully.
bone, and you'll understand it a bit more, just in terms of some funding. Just been looking at some of the reports that have been put out independently, advocates of families for the SEND system, so it's not government buyers. There's been an increase of 40% SEND budgets in excess of 740 million over the past 3 years, and a further 300 million in capital projects, which is a drop in the ocean. They're huge numbers, but clearly still insufficient to really bring about the reforms and the changes and the support that we need for families and for councils. Councillor Martin, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just wanted to confirm my understanding, Councillor Burton, just around our opportunity. You said that we would be able to have full sight of once it's gone through the government conversations, as we've heard, to view what the contract and most importantly the management plan will look like. That's what you've said, and that's what I've understood. Is that correct?
So, yes, that was what I said. Yeah.
And in terms of the opportunity for us to then scrutinise that and have that additional meeting, I would really want to have the motion carried forward, or whatever it would be called, for us to have that meeting. I think Mr. Farrant's obviously called it a huge decision, one of the biggest decisions, I think, particularly in child services, we are going to have sight of and the ability to discuss. Brilliant. So yeah, I just like that note to be, Chair, that I would love to have that meeting before the final decision is made, and having access to all that information and data, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that discussion offline and have that discussion with Democratic Services. I'm well aware that I believe that the date that this is going to be submitted is the 12th of January. Is that correct? So we will see how I'll discuss the timelines and timeframes with Ms. Hadley, and then see how we can sneak a meeting in between that New Year's Eve and the 12th of January. Thank you. And Councillor Moriarty.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, next time we do meet to scrutinise the management plan, would it be at all possible? I believe the safety valve has already been implemented in various other local authorities. Could we see how well they're doing, or otherwise, in terms of the children's provision and perhaps deficit in terms of finances as well, so that we can have some sense of, is it worth it? Thank you.
Sorry, Ms Headley.
Just to point out, there's already on the government website the contracts of each and every local authority they already have. I mean, it gives you details of some of the activities, but it doesn't give that finer detail of the monitoring process and whether they've been successful or not. I think there is a question around how much information we could glean, but also it's not our information to give to yourselves, and so there will be a confidentiality, but there is some on the government website.
Councillor Martin.
I'd just be interested to hear Mr. Kerr's view, please. He's, from what I understand, very experienced in how you've introduced him today. I'd love to hear his opinion on a local authority of our size with a deficit of our size, how he views this as our situation we find ourselves in, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Kerr, if that's okay. So just so that everyone understands, I invited Mr. Kerr along because I've been reading a few articles that have been published recently, and Matt has had a really good oversight answering and looking at those contracts and how it's affected local authorities at national level, and actually where perhaps what happens if those targets aren't met and the consequences. So I didn't know, Matthew Kerr, if you were able to speak to that and to the issues that Mr. Martin has raised.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll keep it brief. It's an extremely difficult situation for you all. The both in terms of the size of the deficit, the proportion of the dedicated schools grant, the difficulties you as a local authority have in controlling the supply of additional specialist support. So you're dependent on the Department for Education getting its act together to get capital projects moving. I think another thing that will make your lives much more difficult, unfortunately, is I've just looked at the rate at which your high needs block is growing next year, and it's one of the lowest rates in the country. It'll be 3% after, I think, several years of around 8 to 10 or 12%. When I've looked at the 34 safety valve programs nationally, the DfE take the accountability side of this very, very seriously. Cynically, far more seriously than they take the rights of the children that the system is set up to support. If the agreement is signed, they will expect formal updates 3 times a year. And if the targets within the safety valve system are not deemed to have been met, they will withhold money for you, placing local authorities in an exceptionally difficult position. There have been several occasions where they've withheld funding. Some councils, I don't know if this will apply to BCP, have also been asked to commit resources from the general fund as well, or on a temporary basis. As I understand it, you're one of 5 local authorities that will be going through this process this year.
Thank you. And is there anything in the research that you've done in terms of statutory responsibilities versus the KPIs that need to be met, and that balance and that dichotomy, and actually which one seems to win in the end?
So typically speaking, the DfE are pretty ruthless about the financial KPIs for the agreements I've seen thus far. They will hold you to a specific number of EHCPs at the end of each financial year. They will specify a number of plans that have to be ceased, average spend per plan, the proportion educated in mainstream versus specialist. What they are largely silent on in all of the KPIs I have seen thus far are outcomes. So the safety valve agreements are quite, appropriately written as objectives to meet more need within mainstream settings, meet more need without the needs of an education, health and care plan. But I have not yet seen an example of a local authority that's properly had its feet held to the fire for a failure to meet need. And that I find, I guess, particularly difficult to stomach. But where they will hold your feet to the fire on is on the money. So that essentially, to my mind, pushes the risk downwards onto you guys, and then you know, with the best will in the world, that risk ends up often being put down onto schools and onto the young people themselves.
Sorry, yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kerr. If there's anything else you'd like to add, then obviously by all means, anyone who's online, just raise your hand and I'll try and keep an eye out. But if I don't see it, then please do shout. Councillor Cooper.
I'd just be interested in which other authorities, the five that the chap mentioned, he said the five other authorities. So who are they? And is there any kind of resemblance? And can we communicate with them about what action they're taking or any combined action we can take to protect our children and young people from this kind of financial, well, I shan't use the word I want to, but it is financial bullying, brutal. So who are they? Does anyone know? Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Dove, I can come in there if that's helpful.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so the other councils are Bracknell Forest, who are probably the most similar to you in statistically, Cheshire East, Wiltshire, and I think the fifth is likely to be Devon, who tried to negotiate a safety valve agreement last year and were unable to reach agreement with the DfE.
Okay, so it would be really good. Who would take responsibility to talk to Devon and the others and just say, what process did you go through? What was difficult? What did you learn? How could we learn from that? And perhaps we could have some joint action with the five authorities about where we go from here and how we do it. So it's like, where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we want to get there as a local authority? I think we can't just do this on our own. If other authorities are being put under this pressure, and surely we need to work together through the local government organisation to make something concrete happen. Or am I naive?
No, I think there's obviously been 34 other authorities who've been on this journey before us, and there's obviously a lot of learning to do or take from there, and obviously 5 on this at the moment. I think Councillor Broadhead's got his hand up, but I just wanted to ask Councillor Burton, because obviously you've heard quite a lot and you are the elected representative as the portfolio holder for Children's Services, and I suppose what the families are going to ask you is, how are we going to be looked after in all of this, given some of the stories that we've heard, say Kent, for example, and Leeds? How do we ensure that we don't have that happen here to us in BCP?
I must admit, that is quite a difficult question to answer, because I also feel the tensions around this, because as you've heard, the drive for this is for financial drive. However, we've got to also ensure that financial drive doesn't affect the quality to our young people. The only thing I can say is that is very much on my mind, and I know on the officer's mind, to strike that balance. However, we do hear that the financial problems make this quite acute. We didn't mention the fact that this carrying over this budget deficit, we have to service that budget deficit as well. So at this moment in time, even though it's being carried forward, it is costing the local authority money, and of course that is money that we can't spend on our young people. So making the savings so that we can save that money on the young people would be my priority.
I appreciate that, but we've still got the legal obligations under the Children's and Families Act that we absolutely have to meet, and this is a contract. So how are we going to manage that risk and ensure that we don't neglect the statutory responsibilities, because actually there's going to be a point where we could end up losing money as a result of the contract negotiations. Councillor Burton first, and I think Ms Hadley wants to come in after.
I was going to suggest that I defer to Mrs Hadley for the technical bit of this to start with, and then I can always come back in a moment.
It is a challenge, because it is that rub between that rub between those two things. I would want to reassure that from an officer's point of view, we have to actually meet statutory responsibility. That is a non-negotiable. It's how we meet that statutory responsibility is probably the question. And is there something that we could do differently? I don't know what that difference is at this moment in time because we haven't worked through that in terms of the plan. But for instance, you know, if you look at BCP currently, we are an outlier with the number of children with EHCPs within the mainstream school system. So we are low, whereas others are about. So are there things that we could do differently? And that's been part of the conversation. So it is about how can we do things differently, which don't actually impact on the delivery of service. That said, there is those pressures around meeting those financial obligations and what that might look like. We have quite a strong parent carer forum, and so we would also want to involve them in some of this work and how that is delivered.
Thank you. I think Councillor Broadhead, you were next.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It was just on the last point that a colleague raised about learning the lessons from others, as well as having an open dialogue with other local authorities that are on a perhaps similar journey to us at the same time. As you correctly pointed out, there's 34 other authorities that have already been on the previous phase of this safety valve, and I think whilst we've heard that there are information we can learn around the contracts, I do think there's something around actually speaking to those that have been on part of this journey, lessons learned. How this committee can contribute to that in the time frame available is something we might wish to explore, because we are quite limited on time. But with every other aspect of things that we tend to do as councils, we're not the first ones to have been on this journey, and it's absolutely crucial to speak to others and learn from their mistakes. I regularly reach out to colleagues across the country and tell them things that I wish I'd have known and lessons learned, and we must do the same. And on the secondary point around the other councils that are in the same phase as us, many of us are already talking to the other authorities. I'm one of the regional peers for the LGA, and only today have been speaking to both Devon and Wiltshire, who are in a very similar position to us around this time. I'm not sure that extends as far as coordination of our efforts, because each individual council is treated differently for the purposes of negotiation with the government. But again, there is something about having a joined up approach on this, because we are all in the same boat. We are all dealing with the same issues. So 2 points. First of all, what can we do in terms of lessons learned, not just regarding the paperwork, but actually about the impact, as you've mentioned, on services? And secondly, just some thinking, and I don't have any answers, incidentally, about whether there is any further coordination over and above work that's already been done by some of us with the others that are on this journey at the same time.
Hadley or Councillor Burton, any response to what we can do and what we've learnt and coordination?
So I have been in touch with some of the ones that have actually been part of the journey. I would say that some of the expressed feelings here were similar across the system, and so I would say that it is a challenge to see everybody in a similar light, because everybody's situation is different, everybody's financial situation is different, and so the resultant deficit in 2026 would be different, and so therefore some of the contracts are very different depending on where they are. So there could be a coordinated approach, but there is sort of thinking about whether we are all in exactly the same boat.
Anyone else from the floor at this moment? It's gone very quiet. Things are processing time. Yeah. Oh, Councillor Burton.
It's just one thing to add to that. There isn't a pattern with these local authorities. The pattern is basically that they've all got a high needs block deficit, which is increasing. The type of council, the size of the council, whether they're good or outstanding, or requires improvement or failing in that area. It also the financial stability of the council also seems to not form a pattern. So every council seems to be very different. I know I've been trying to make conversations with other councils as well who've gone through the process. You're right, the published information is available. To be honest, the published information isn't that detailed, but the detail can often be confidential. Therefore, some private conversations need to be had.
No, I agree. And there is no uniformity apart from in the contracts. The uniformity seems to be the number of EHCPs that we are issuing or hold with young people, and the targets around those who are being educated within mainstream schools rather than special or specialist provisions. And I just wondered, because obviously these discussions will have been had at some point, because you can start to work out what you think you can reasonably deliver for it to go into the contract. And I suppose the first question would be is in terms of the EHCPs and bringing that number down to the number of CYPs who hold EHCPs, how are you proposing that would sort of be carried out, and how would you envision sort of meeting those targets? And just traditionally, the contracts are around about 20% to 34% reductions that need to be made with the contract so far.
At this moment in time, we don't have the action plan, and so the detail is not there.
So the action plan, are you saying is going to come after you've agreed a contract or just before? So this is the piece of work that we're going to bring back prior to the 12th of January.
So what needs to be done? Obviously, we did some work through the delivering better value. We looked at what is it that we could do in that space. So, for instance, about how do we build capacity in our school system? And so there's some work going on in those areas. So there'd be work in there. So how can we extend what we've already thought about doing? Because obviously we need to do more than was set out in the delivering better value. We will need to think about our data and our statistics and the work that we do and our processes and how we manage our work through the system, and how we deliver that for us to be able to then formulate a plan. And that work is currently underway.
So, Councillor Moriarty.
Forget the naivety of this question, but would it be possible to invite the spokesperson from the Department of Education to come and talk to us so that we could actually, is that something that's doable?
I mean, I can ask. Whether they will come is a different matter.
So, I know we've got a DfE advisor. Is that the person that we would be looking to invite? It would be someone completely different dealing with the budgets and safety valves, and right? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Harman.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Can I ask who will be part of that initial negotiation process when we're coming up with the management plan? Who will be around that table?
So we've had an initial meeting with DfE advisors, and so there are a number who have got different expertise. And so there's someone with it, so they're called DfE case officers. So there's one with financial expertise, there's one with social care, EHCP expertise. And so they are a team that come and work with us, look at our data, and begin to work with us in terms of formulating that plan. And so they are commissioned by the DfE to do that work. We've had one initial meeting with the caseworker currently, and that's as far as we've got at this moment in time. And so there's sort of data and number crunching and things like that are going on in the background from their kind of conversation.
And so from the council, is that yourself, Kathy, who will be in those conversations, and also Graham?
So it currently at the level of beginning to develop and consider the actions. That is the team, the SEND team, headed by education improvement consultant who's doing that work, that obviously then will come to me and Graham in terms of sign off.
And can I also ask, if we do enter the safety valve and we're successful with our part of the agreement, what happens if there is still a deficit? What support will be in place to help us?
I don't know, because their expectation is that we eradicate that deficit within a particular period of time.
So I've just got Graham wanting to come in, and it may be on that matter, and then we'll carry on with the questions.
It was only just to add to Kathy's answer. It really depends on the negotiations and where we get to, I think. So that support could be varied. We are talking to other local authorities that have been through the safety valve through the earlier phase as well. So we'll see what support we can get, what the offer is. Don't forget, of course, and we haven't said much about this, but we've had a lot of work done already under the delivering Better Value programme, which was, if you like, the lowercase version of Safety Valve. And we had Newton Europe in doing a lot of work on that, how far we could reduce the deficit or could be expected to reduce the deficit. So we have done a lot of that work. That then plays into the safety valve discussions. The support that we get will depend on how successfully we can negotiate, I think.
That's really helpful, Graham. And in your discussions with other local authorities, have you discussed in the contract how you are going to measure the outcomes for families and ensure that that isn't compromised?
There are means of doing that, but to be honest, most of the conversations we've had so far have been about the financial parameters, because it is such a big issue for us. And I have said semi-publicly, so I might as well say it publicly, the real challenge we have is that the costs of the service that we have to provide under the statutory rules and definitions of what we have to provide, the costs are bigger than the budget we have available to us via the High Needs Block. That is the real challenge. So government has to, in my view, determine that the current services are right, the levels are right, and therefore review its budgeting for the service, or it has to redefine the service in some way to bring the cost down. There is, there are some middle ground that we can do. We can look at reducing exclusions. We can look at cheaper placements, lower cost placements. But to provide the standard of service that is required with the current availability of placements, it costs more than the budget that's available. That is the challenge for us. And if it can't be funded from the general fund, as it can't at the moment because of the statutory set aside, we have to find a way of funding the service. It is a complex position. Safety Valve will help us to deal with the deficit. Delivering Better Value was intended to help us with the increasing deficit, but didn't actually come up with a solution.
No, I understand that. I think delivering better value, though, I mean, we did all that work. We haven't had very long to see that implementation come in, because I think we only got the grant a little while ago. It was about £1 million grant. So it's that difficult stage that we're in to see the fruit of the DBV coming through versus the immediate risk of our deficit.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? Because the idea of delivering better value was to come up with a plan to reduce the increase in the deficit. The annual cost is going up and up each year. The idea of delivering better value was to help us to find ways of stopping the increase. It didn't. It came up with ways of slowing the increase, but it did not conclude that we could safely, maintaining the services, reduce the increase in the deficit year on year. And that's the challenge for us. So that's the real issue. The budget is not big enough to fund the level of service in the way that we're currently providing it.
That makes it sound like we either then have to prioritise our budget or we prioritise our level of service, which means we might not be meeting our statutory responsibilities. And I don't know if you've got a comment on that, then, Graham.
Yeah, certainly. At the moment, government has given us the facility to not make that choice because of the statutory set aside. If that statutory set aside did not exist, you as councillors would still have to balance your budget. You would have to make decisions about services that would have to be reduced either in this area or in other areas. And the challenge then would be, which services do you want to cut to fund it? At the moment, the statutory set aside is allowing us to not make that judgment because it is saying you cannot fund it from general fund. Therefore, we are not making that judgment. We are providing the service as cheaply and efficiently as we can whilst meeting the service requirements that are set out for us. That is the long and short of it, in my view. We are providing a service because we have to under statute that is not covered by the budget that is available for it.
Thank you. I've got a long list of speakers growing. So first we've got Councillor Cooper.
I don't know. As I'm listening, I just think it's an extension of austerity, really, and it's how we kind of challenge that, because we've had a reduction of services throughout councils since 2010. We can't sort of change that, but what we can do is, if Graham, you're saying, and it is, they're asking us to deliver a statutory service, but they're not giving us the money to do it, then surely that's well, let's get in the boxing ring with you or whatever, because you're asking us to do an almost impossible task. And the most vulnerable in our society are the ones who will be hit the hardest. You know, I'm not saying this is a class issue. Oh, well, maybe it is. You know, the poor, the vulnerable, the children are not getting the support. The schools, this seems to be asking, you know, the quotas are not about well-being and harmony and cohesion and development and working together as a community. It's about quotas to reduce costs. And so we either take that and say, oh yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to sleep with that. I'm certainly not. I will be a pain in the backside. Because every time, you know, cuts have consequences. We've seen it since 2010. And this is just part of that. What we have to do is work out with other local authorities is how we can challenge and combat that cross-party. Because if we don't, we'll all be out of work in 20 years. There'll be no local authorities. There'll all be charities. There'll be people on low wages and poor working conditions. It's all part of the framework. So what do you think of that? Sorry.
I think we have a budget and it's up to us to decide where we're going to spend that budget, be it on spending or other political priorities. So next we've got Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I kind of, it's my question's sort of been answered and addressed. And I guess when you set targets, quotas on service delivery and you reduce the spend in an already very challenged service that we've got in our in BCP, I just don't understand how that doesn't reduce the quality, the care that we can offer under a statutory service, which is just not going to be fit for purpose. But I understand where we're at. I completely understand it. Financially, we are in a deep hole like a lot of other local authorities. But just a comment, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think next we have Peter online.
And I've got two questions to ask. If you can't find the money for your budget, will it affect the council taxpayers of BCP?
So can I just ask you to repeat that, particularly the very last part?
If you can't find the budget, will it come from the taxpayers of BCP?
Who would like to answer that one? Possibly Chief Executive.
Thank you. I'll pick that up. Well, at the moment, the rules are that we can't fund it from council tax. That's what the statutory set aside effectively does through to March 2026. If that were withdrawn, and the ruling was the council would have to fund it, then it would have to come from, I mean, council tax provides us with about 2/3 of our income, business rates with about 1/3, a little bit of government grant. So it would have to come from that budget. The challenge would be balancing the demands for all of the services the council has to provide from that budget overall. So there's bound to be an impact. Couldn't say what that impact would be.
Right. With all these roadworks and things going on at the moment, wouldn't it be better for the money what's being done to be funded into the education?
I think there's lots of roadworks going on at the moment, and could that money be better spent putting it into education?
At the moment, we provide the service that we need to provide. The HCP service, SEND service is provided through Children's Services. So I don't think the spending of money on the roadworks is taking money away from children and young people that need support. But should the council have to make a decision within a ring-fence budget, it would have to balance those priorities. At the moment, fortunately, we don't have to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just and on that last point, I think that the Chief Exec's quite right with the structure of this at the moment. It is not that choice that we're having to make between other council services or other aspirations and RSEN provision, which is clearly very, very important. I think if we ever got to that stage where there was where the dispensation essentially wasn't allowed, or other things came into play, frankly, we've got a bigger problem, because with the number of local authorities that this impacts, it would just be unsustainable. I just can't see any government of any colour getting to the stage where they wouldn't come up with a much larger solution, probably, if I'm being honest, over and above the current safety valve system that we're on, because as we've heard from the public questions at the beginning and other comments, the amount of money that this is forecasting to keep accumulating to, despite safety valve mechanisms, is probably still not enough to deal with the challenge, quite aside from what we've been talking about, which is the impacts of service provision, which will come to bite as well. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how we get there, but I don't think we're going to get into that that position of having to make those really drastic choices. Hope, touch wood. The question that I wanted to raise was, and it was just about, and the cabinet member may have some views on this. What can we do in this Children's Services Committee to be part of the process going forward with the safety valve? Because I mean, there's two ways potentially as a committee we could handle this, and timings are quite tight, which makes it difficult. We could just wait until the next level of the final decision and the result of the negotiations have taken place, and then bring it to us to scrutinise and have an opinion on it. That's one thing. I don't think it'll be particularly fruitful in terms of further input, but it will be scrutinising a decision, or whether there's any capacity to be part of the journey as we go through that negotiating process. And I'm thinking in particular, if we get to the stage where we're having to make choices around level of provision or areas that we may have to think differently about. The Chief Exec gave some examples earlier on of areas where we may have to test and tease, and that doesn't necessarily, if we box clever, and I'm a little bit of an eternal optimist, doesn't necessarily mean that we have to reduce service provision. Sometimes it just means doing things differently, but much better if the collective wisdom here is on that journey rather than just the end result being brought to scrutiny. So it's an open question for the committee, really, in that what part do we think we can play, and is there any capacity within the time frame for us to be able to do so, and via what mechanism?
I'm going to pause that thought, because that's a number one, a potential recommendation that we could add to the paper and ask to go back for consideration for the portfolio holder and for the officers. If there were no more questions, we're ready to move on to recommendations. Happy to do that now. If there's any questions at this moment, then I'm happy to hear those before we move on. Okay, thank you. And then the other recommendation that I was considering was, obviously it's our contract, it's our negotiations. The KPIs and measurements have all been very all about money, basically, and there is no measure of outcomes and the impact that it has on families. And maybe we want to think about some wording around that for that to go back as a recommendation for consideration to be included in the contract. Councillor Brown.
Can I just add, I know we are corporate parents and I know that's very important, but I'm also mindful that we're talking about children and families, but we also need to be talking about schools, teachers. There's going to be a huge impact on that demographic as well. So I'd like that to be kind of noted too.
Can I just ask, I don't know if that's yourself, Kathy or Graham, how set in stone is the 12th of January? I appreciate we've obviously got budget setting February, but it feels like this is such a tight time scale that consultation is going to be really difficult. I mean, we really got to ensure that we get best value but quality as a result of this contract as well, to make sure it delivers what it's supposed to deliver. So how set in stone is the 12th of January?
It's the DFE's date, so it's set in stone from then.
Okay, so Councillor Brown, continue then, if that's okay. And that's true. I mean, has there been any consultation? I know we sort of took DBV to Schools Forum in January this year. Who have we consulted with in terms of this and the impact and that it will have on school? I mean, because there's layers to this. It's multifaceted and it affects so many people, doesn't it?
It is a challenge, and I think as we've kind of alluded to, and as Graham's pointed out, the approach from the DFE is a very financial one. I think there is some reassurance around the fact that we do have a SEND improvement board and we do have parent carers sitting on that SEND improvement board, and so there are options for some support in that area. But it is a tight timescale. The DFE conversation has not alluded to consultation at all, or co-production. So that does, and I do think that puts us in a challenging position from those 2 points of sides of the coin.
Sorry, Councillor Burton.
Yeah, just to pick up to answer Councillor Broadhead, and to pick up on the points that you said earlier on. As you probably know, I'm a big fan of scrutiny, being involved with it for such a long time. Pre-decision scrutiny, not just post-decision scrutiny, because I feel that it's a combined expertise, experience of people on the committee, seeing things from different angles. So you know, I would welcome that. You know, ideas, whatever the ideas are always well received. You mentioned the political priorities. My personal political priorities are to see a good developing SEND service in BCP. That's why we've just invested in money to try to reduce the HCP backlog. As you remember, came to full council last time. So that is, you know, I know my political priority, and I also know members of the administration are with me on that.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. And I don't want to set aside your good endeavours, because I sincerely believe that you and I are one on this. We know we spent a lot of time in Warwick together. I do believe we're aligned on the services we want to see. It's just the danger of the contract details, sort of the tail wagging the dog, that I'm concerned about. Something that Miss Hadley said about consultation, and I was just thinking again, it's about our legal obligations, isn't it? And it's the Brown principles, and I'm just not sure how we're going to get all of that satisfied, the EIA and a contract written in that timescale, so that we've actually got a really good fit for purpose contract. So what reassurance can you give us around that then, please?
So we will be following the structure that DFE sets out, and that is what we will have to follow. We will have to consider how we bring that forward and have a conversation with Democratic Services in terms of ONS, but equally in terms of how we utilise those forums that we already have, in terms of the contract going forward.
I don't know if I'm not sure if you've entirely answered how we're going to fulfil the Brown principles, which we have to do obviously by law, and make sure it's meaningful, and how we're going to measure that part.
We will have to look at how we do that as structured as part of the timelines that we have.
Does anyone have anything else at this moment in time? Okay. Online, I think, is there anything that you'd like to say, Mr. Martin, Mr. Hall, Mr. Kerr? Thank you. So there's two recommendations. One is member engagement and representation with this panel sort of moving forward, and then also the wording that we would be comfortable with to ensure that the families and their outcomes and children and young people are safeguarded, and we've got KPIs that you know, sort of measure that impact, so that there isn't inadvertent and unfortunate consequences. I think it could take some time to come up with some wording that we're comfortable with, but also that Councillor Burton and Kathy and the Chief Executive are happy with. So if it's okay with you, are you happy if we just pause the recording? We have that discussion so we can tidy up the wording, make sure we're exactly where we are. We don't have to empty the room. It's not, you know, we're not going below the line, so the members of the public can remain if they'd like to. But I just think it might be a bit tidier and easier if we can have that discussion and make sure we get to some wording that everybody's happy with, if that's okay. Is everyone in agreement? Oh yeah. Thank you. So just to clarify, you've had 2 suggestions from yourself and Councillor Broadhead, but you haven't formally moved or seconded. I do that. I don't know whether you want to have a conversation first of all, like you've suggested, by adjourning to sort of round off that wording a bit more.
So.
But in terms of what Councillor Broadhead was raising around the committee getting involved in anything, I just wanted to flag the constitutional requirements. So if you are going to look at doing some additional commission work, whether that's a working group or rapporteurs, you need to look at what resources are available. So that might be a discussion that needs to be had after this committee. You can put forward your views, but we do need to look at that.
Yeah.
And also an important thing is to make sure that in ONS you're not duplicating other work that's taking place. So I do think a close discussion around what other forums are looking at the negotiating work as it's going along is important to be aware of. Thanks.
No, that's fine. If it's okay, we can sort of propose and second any recommendations once we're all happy with some wording. At this moment in time, I just need to ensure that everyone's happy. If we just pause the recording for the moment, have that discussion, and then come back online with some wording that everyone might be satisfied with. Yeah, don't see any dissent. Happy? Yeah. Okay. And those online, by all means, please remain and be involved as much as you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, especially for everyone's watching at home. Just come up with a outline of the first recommendation in terms of where we can support as a overview and scrutiny committee the negotiations that are being undertaken at the moment. Councillor Broadhead, if you wouldn't mind just putting forward your wording as it stands.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to colleagues for bearing with us. I think we're all collectively agreed that we want to be part of the process as much as possible to help, particularly a central part of what we were talking about earlier on was about just ensuring that outcomes are central to this part of the negotiation, not just money. So I think the wording that I was suggesting was as follows: the committee welcomes the work underway by officers as part of the safety valve process. However, we are determined that outcomes should remain a central part of the negotiations with government. Accordingly, the committee resolves to delegate the chairman to make representations and provide input as part of that negotiation process.
Sorry, and if I take that as a proposal at
Happy
this
to-
moment in
happy to
time,
propose.
and then
Yeah.
second by Councillor Bull, and I'll open that up to the floor for debate. If it's easier, are you going to email it around quickly, or are you all happy with the wording? Yeah, so just can recap the wording before any vote. Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, what we're suggesting is that we have a closer input as a committee via myself, with alongside Councillor Burt in terms of the negotiation. So I'm not sure how the committee feels at this moment in time with that wording. Any thoughts? So Councillor Harman.
Instead, because I pick up on your point, Councillor Cooper, about the word welcomes. I struggle with that too. If we had something more, the committee understands the necessity of the work being carried out, something more along those lines, I would feel happier with personally.
Sorry, just Councillor Broadhead to respond to that, and then Councillor Moriarty.
I'm absolutely happy. I mean, the wording I put was essentially to thank the officers for the work that they were doing on the process, but I understand, that the word, welcome comes with a kind of implicit association. So yeah, I'm happy to amend to that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Moriarty.
And I was going to echo that actually, that welcome safety valve. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about welcoming the hard work of all the officers, and I think that needs to stay. But welcoming the safety valve to me is just.
Councillor Broadhead hasn't yet sent it to me, so Councillor Broadhead can read his wording.
Okay, so I'll read out the wording. This committee understands the necessity of the work underway as part of the safety valve process. However, we are determined that outcomes should remain a central part of the negotiations with government. Accordingly, the committee resolves to delegate the chairman to make representations and hopefully provide input as part of that negotiation process.
Go on, Councillor Cooper.
Semantics, I know, it's just that outcomes can mean anything. And that's, I mean, for me, I would kind of want to measure the outcomes on the well-being and harmony of children, young people and their families, because we could measure the outcomes of how successful it is to like slice this and slice that and save money. So outcomes, but maybe expand it a little bit.
Yeah, so outcomes to service users and their families. I hate the word service users, but they are effectively what it is.
Negative
Sorry?
I think the problem is, even if it is outcomes, I think you're absolutely right. Outcomes itself could mean financial outcomes. So
yeah, I think it's making it outcomes directly to the outcomes that affect those who are using our services and their families. So it'll be children, young people and families, but it really makes the sentence really long and clumsy. Sure. Thank you. I think Lindsay's just going to tidy up the wording quickly, and then we'll have a read, and then But no, thank you, Councillor Cooper, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Children, young people and families.
Okay, so I've got as revised wording, the committee understands the necessity for the work underway by officers as part of the safety valve process. However, we are determined that outcomes for children, young people and families should remain a central part of the negotiations with government. Accordingly, the committee resolves to delegate the chairman to make representations and hopefully provide input as part of that negotiation process.
Which then I think negates the need for a second recommendation about what should go in the contract for the outcome. I'm really sorry, Dave, I completely forgot and you've waited very patiently. I'm so sorry.
You're forgiven, Chair. Yeah, Chair at the negotiating table, I think sets out our stall. I think early on in how seriously we take this. I think it's a strong move in terms of showing our intent and how seriously we're taking this. Hopefully that's possible, and we'll talk about that. The bit that's really important to me though is that we still as a committee meet in January so I just wanted to see that was still something that we were planning to do, and that wasn't replacing that meeting in January.
I totally agree with you. I think my fear is, and I don't know if Councillor Burton or Kathy have the same concerns, is if we do not speak in between to the team and it comes to us with all that hard work having been put in and we go, actually, nah, and it's a bit too late, especially if the 12th of January is so very set in stone. So I think using a more sort of conduit approach between now and that next meeting, and I'll discuss with Lindsay and Dem Services how we would get that in a timely way. Is something, would you like to make a second recommendation when this is dealt with for the additional meeting, so there's clarity around the habit of the committee? Brilliant, we'll do that. So we've got the wording now proposed by Councillor Broadhead, seconded by Councillor Bull. Is everyone happy with that as it is at the moment? Show of hands, please. That's okay. Oh, that's unanimous. Sorry, there's a recommendation for asking for it to come back, and if Lindsay has a suggested wording that perhaps Councillor Martin might want to propose, if that's okay.
I think, Chair, what the committee's will is that you have an additional meeting on the safety valve prior to the conclusion of the negotiation arrangements, which you understand to be the 12th of January. And again, that could be delegated to the chairman to discuss with officers an appropriate date. Is that what everybody is? And if so, do you have a seconder, or proposer and a seconder?
Councillor Martin, are you happy with that? Yep, and anyone like to second that? I will.
Okay. Sorry, could you just say that wording again, just so we're really clear? Thank you.
Sorry, that was off the top of my head. So we will obviously we'll obviously tidy that up. But what the wish of the committee is, as I understand, is that an additional meeting of the committee is held prior to the conclusion of the negotiation arrangements, which you understand to be the 12th of January. So you're saying you want an additional meeting on the safety valve before, so that you see the information before it's finished. So we'll obviously word that appropriately. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
If we want, I don't know if we're allowed to be privy to those documents, or if that's up, I don't know if that, again, that's something that hasn't happened before, or privy to that discussion, or if you know when your documents are going to be ready before, because that's going to affect that, like when we have that meeting as well. time is very short for all of us, and so therefore those documents should be, one would hope within draft form by the time we get to before Christmas, because obviously we have to accommodate a 2-week Christmas holiday in all of this, or week, whatever. And so obviously there will be documents that will be in draft. I think it's about negotiating. When I say negotiating, meaning if they came to committees, understanding how developed they are, etc., wouldn't it? Yeah.
So I think the main, and that can perhaps, if recommendation 1 is taken up, if that's okay, if I can be trusted, obviously, to sort of say, actually, I think these are the documents that we need to perhaps see and ensure that the committee are updated on, and obviously I'll keep you all involved. And then obviously the need to just ensure that we're all happy to have another meeting on this. With that in mind, so we've got a proposer and a seconder. Is everyone like take a vote? So those in favour? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Let me just make sure I haven't forgotten anything, because it's been a really long session, and I've been here somewhat since it's 4:30. So I just want to ensure that we've covered everything that we need to cover, and then thank you, and should be able to time to go home. Yeah, so thank you very much. I'd like to thank the officers for coming forward and giving their time this evening. Also, we just wanted to extend our thanks to your team as well, who provided that workforce meeting and the sort of training session earlier. It was really good quality, and it's clear they put a lot of time into that. So please pass on our thanks for that. Thank you everyone for coming in at short notice and holding this extra meeting, and for keeping you 26 minutes longer than I should. And thanks again also for those joining online. It was very nice to see you, and thank you all for your contributions. Good night.